It wasn't the yelling that did it. It wasn't the cold, angry silence that followed. It wasn't even the infidelity, though that stung deep enough to tear through everything I thought I knew about us. No, it was the moment I realized I had become a shadow in my own marriage. It hit me at the most unexpected place, a party. Not a birthday party or a celebration, just a random event thrown by some acquaintances of my wife. I wasn't excited to go. I don't know if I was ever excited to go to these kinds of things anymore. I told myself I was just doing it for her, to be the good husband, but the truth? The truth was that I wasn't even sure who I was trying to please anymore. I didn't want to make a big deal of it, so I put on my jacket, adjusted my tie, and told myself to at least act like I was interested. After all, this was just another one of those nights where she'd get lost in her social circle, and I'd quietly sit on the sidelines. I had long ago accepted this role, the background guy, the one who wasn't supposed to ask too many questions. What I didn't expect was to be a spectator to the unraveling of my life. The venue was a rundown old house, dimly lit, with people talking in the background, the usual hum of conversation that meant absolutely nothing. Jessica, my wife, was radiant as always. She wore this red dress, one that hugged her curves perfectly, the same dress I had always complimented her on. She looked beautiful, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of detachment that I couldn't ignore. She introduced me to a few people, but I could tell her mind was elsewhere. Her smile, though genuine, felt rehearsed, almost too perfect. She wasn't looking at me in the way she used to. She was distant, like she was present in the room, but her mind was somewhere else. I didn't want to admit it, but I had seen that look before, and I knew exactly what it meant. And then he walked in. A man I had never met. He was tall, well-dressed, with an air of confidence that was impossible to ignore. His name was Thomas. She said it with such ease when she introduced us, almost like she had known him for years. We shook hands, but my gut twisted when I saw the way she looked at him. It wasn't a look I was used to. There was something more in her eyes, a glint of recognition that made my stomach churn. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. Maybe he was just another colleague. Maybe they'd crossed paths at some work event. But as the evening progressed, I couldn't shake the feeling. I watched as she spent more time with him than with me. They laughed louder than anyone else, exchanged private jokes, and stood too close, their conversations dipping into territories I wasn't a part of. The longer I stayed, the more uncomfortable I became. I wandered around the room, occasionally bumping into people I knew, trying to keep my mind busy, but all I could think about was her. I knew, in the pit of my stomach, that something was off. It wasn't just the way they talked, it was the way he looked at her, like he was waiting for something, or worse, like he already knew something I didn't. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe I was overreacting. After all, we'd been through ups and downs in our marriage. But this felt different. And then, at one point, I saw them. Alone. In the corner. I couldn't hear the words they were exchanging, but the body language was clear. She was leaning in too close, laughing a little too hard at his jokes. I knew that laugh. It wasn't the same one she gave me. It was the kind of laugh that came with secrets. I stood there for a moment, frozen, watching them interact. My mind raced. Was I really seeing what I thought I was seeing? Was this a new connection? Or was it something deeper, something I couldn't ignore any longer? That's when I saw her slip her hand onto his arm, and that's when it hit me. She wasn't just laughing at his jokes. She wasn't just having a casual conversation. She was flirting with him. And it was obvious. My chest tightened, my breath short. I wanted to confront her right there, demand answers, but I didn't. I stayed silent. I watched. But as the night went on, something shifted in me. Something broke. It wasn't the anger or the pain that hit first. It was a strange calmness, like I was watching the final act of a play I had no part in. I realized then that whatever this was, it was bigger than me. Bigger than anything I could fix. She didn't even say goodbye when she left. And I didn't stop her. It wasn't until the next morning, when I woke up to an empty house, that it all became too real. I thought about all the times I had ignored the signs, brushed off the warning bells in my head. I thought about all the nights I stayed up late, wondering where she was, what she was doing. I thought about the life I thought I had, one that now felt like a lie. The sound of the front door opening in the early hours of the morning pulled me from my thoughts. It wasn't her. I looked down at the ring on my finger, the one I had worn for years, and for the first time, I wondered if it meant anything at all. By the time she came back, I was already gone. It wasn't the leaving that hurt, it was the silence afterward. The kind of silence that fills your chest with a weight you can't shake off. It was the silence of knowing, deep down, that something fundamental had shifted, and no words could undo it. Jessica came home that night, but she didn't come in with any apologies, any explanations. She walked through the door, quietly, as if nothing had happened, like it was just another evening. I watched her. I don't know why, but I couldn't look away. Her steps were deliberate, measured. There was no urgency to come to me, no surprise that I was still awake, waiting for answers. It was like she had already made up her mind about everything, and I wasn't part of it anymore. I stayed on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone, though I couldn't see a single word on the screen. My thoughts were racing, but they weren't coherent. They were just flashes of moments. The way she'd looked at him, the way she'd smiled at him, like she wasn't even married. It gnawed at me, this thought that she wasn't the woman I'd married anymore. Finally, she spoke. "You still awake?" Her voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was neutral, distant. "I'm not tired," I answered, my voice too quiet, too controlled. If I raised it, I knew it would crack. If I let the anger out now, I'd never stop. She moved into the kitchen and started preparing something to eat, though she didn't seem hungry. Her movements were robotic. Open the fridge, pull out the ingredients, chop them mechanically. She wasn't even looking at what she was doing, just going through the motions of being a wife, of pretending she was still the same person I once knew. I wanted to scream at her, to demand why she'd left with him, why she'd stayed away for so long without even telling me where she was going. But I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I just watched her, helplessly, as she prepared a meal neither of us wanted. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, she turned to me, her face softening. "I didn't mean for things to get like this," she said, her voice a little softer now. "I just needed a break. We've been so distant lately." I didn't know what to say. A break? Was she serious? I sat up on the couch, my legs trembling, not from the cold, but from the anger that had suddenly welled up in me. How could she say that? A break? Was that what this was about? A break? From me? From us? I clenched my fists, trying to keep calm. "So that's it. You're just going to walk away? With him?" My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated myself for it. I hated that I was so weak, that I was letting her have control over me like this. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. Her eyes were steady, but there was something distant in them. "I didn't walk away from you," she said, though the words felt hollow. I needed space. I didn't think I could fix things without some time to think." By running off with another man? My voice was rising now, despite my best efforts to keep it down. "This is how you fix things." She took a deep breath and let it out slowly, like she was trying to control her own emotions. "It's not like that," she said, the words heavy with an unspoken weight. "I didn't sleep with him. It wasn't like that. But the damage was already done. I didn't care whether or not she'd slept with him. The fact that she had gone off with him, that she had left me behind so easily, was the part that cut the deepest. It wasn't just the physical distance between us. It was the emotional distance that had grown like a canyon between us, something I couldn't ignore anymore. I stood up from the couch and walked to the door. "I don't know who you are anymore," I said, the words sharp. "But you're not the person I married." Her face fell, but she didn't try to stop me as I grabbed my jacket and walked out of the door. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I needed to get out. I needed space to breathe, to think, to let the anger die down. The streets outside were dark, the cold air biting at my skin. I walked without a destination, without a purpose. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion, of betrayal, of disbelief. I couldn't understand how we had gotten here, how everything had spiraled so quickly out of control. And the worst part? I wasn't even angry at her anymore. Not really. I was angry at myself. Angry for not seeing the signs sooner, for not confronting her sooner, for not realizing that this relationship, this marriage, had been hanging by a thread for far longer than I'd cared to admit. I stopped at the park nearby, sat on a bench, and stared up at the stars. It was quiet, almost peaceful, but it did nothing to ease the tension in my chest. My life felt like it had been torn apart, piece by piece, and I didn't know how to put it back together. The silence was deafening. It was the silence of knowing that things were never going to be the same again. I couldn't tell you how long I sat on that park bench, lost in the cold, staring at the empty space in front of me. My mind was racing, jumping from one thought to the next, never quite settling on any one thing. All I knew was that everything was unraveling, and I couldn't stop it. As the hours passed, I eventually found my way back home. The house felt colder when I stepped through the door, quieter. Jessica was nowhere to be found. I figured she was either still in the kitchen or maybe retreating to her usual spot, her office, which had become her sanctuary in the past few months. I was about to make my way upstairs when I noticed something on the coffee table. It was a letter, an envelope addressed to me. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but something about it felt wrong. Hesitating for only a moment, I picked it up and opened it. It wasn't from her. It wasn't from anyone I knew. But as I read through the words, my heart sank further into my stomach, and everything in my world tilted sideways. The letter was a confession. It was a detailed account of everything that had been happening between Jessica and Thomas, the man she'd left with the other night. It wasn't just a fleeting connection. This had been going on for months. The words described stolen moments, secret meetings, and lies that stretched on for longer than I cared to imagine. I felt my pulse race as I finished reading. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing in. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The letter was an admission of guilt, a confession, and it was clear that Jessica had never planned on telling me any of this. I couldn't even process what was in front of me. For months, I had been left in the dark, wondering why she was pulling away, why our connection had frayed at the edges. I had tried to hold on, tried to make things work, but she had already made up her mind. I sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the words sinking into my chest. This wasn't just about her betraying me. It was about the way she had taken everything I had believed in and twisted it into a cruel joke. She had taken my trust, my loyalty, and thrown it all away without a second thought. I didn't want to confront her. Not yet. Not until I had all the answers. But I knew the confrontation was inevitable. I had to face her. I had to know everything. But when I went upstairs, my legs felt heavy, like they were moving through thick mud. I reached the bedroom door and paused. I couldn't bring myself to knock, so I just turned the handle and stepped inside. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to me. She hadn't heard me come in. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her. It struck me then how much she looked like the woman I used to know, before all the lies, before the distance, before everything changed. "Jessica," I said quietly, the sound of her name catching in my throat. It felt like I was speaking from a place so far away, like I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. She turned around slowly, a soft smile spreading across her face when she saw me. But it didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes were empty, distant, like she had already made up her mind about what was happening between us. "I didn't expect you back so soon," she said, her voice calm. Too calm. It was like she was playing some role, like she had already rehearsed what she was going to say. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. I just walked over and placed the letter on the bed in front of her, letting it speak for me. Her expression faltered for a split second, but she quickly regained her composure. She didn't open the letter. She didn't need to. "I wasn't planning on telling you," she began, her voice tinged with a hint of regret. "But it wasn't like you ever gave me the space to say it." "Space?" I interrupted, the anger rising inside me. "You don't get to blame me for this. You don't get to pretend like I had any control over what happened between you and him." Her face hardened, and she finally picked up the letter, reading it quickly, her eyes scanning the words. When she finished, she dropped it back on the bed, her gaze never leaving mine. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to end things without hurting you." "Ending things," I repeated. The words felt like they were suffocating me. "You were never ending things. You were starting something new, and I was just left behind. You made me into a fool." She stood up now, her face flushing with emotion. "That's not fair," she said, her voice shaking. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I've been so unhappy for so long. You didn't see it, but I was miserable. And Thomas, he made me feel alive again. I didn't know how else to handle it." I shook my head in disbelief. "You could have talked to me. You could have come to me. But instead, you ran off with him. You lied to me, to my face, for months." "I didn't know how to fix it," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know how to fix us." I stood there, frozen, my heart racing, my mind swirling with everything she had just said. She had admitted it. She had admitted everything. And yet, somehow, I couldn't bring myself to leave. I didn't know what was worse, The betrayal or the fact that I was still standing here, hoping for something that was never going to come. I don't know what to do anymore, I said softly, my voice almost a whisper. I don't know who you are anymore. And just like that, the life I had built with her, the life I thought we had, felt like it was crumbling to pieces in front of me. I stood there, staring at her, trying to process everything that had just come to light. The air between us felt thick, suffocating, as though it was holding everything I couldn't say. Every word I had wanted to speak, every accusation I had rehearsed in my head, was caught in my throat, trapped by the weight of the betrayal. Jessica's eyes were still on me, but I couldn't meet her gaze anymore. I felt like I was drowning in her apologies, her excuses, her justification for everything she had done. She had turned my world upside down, and now she was looking at me as if everything could go back to normal, as if a simple apology could erase months of lies, of deceit. It wasn't that easy. Nothing was that simple anymore. I didn't know how to tell you, she repeated, her voice quieter now, but still insistent. I didn't want to hurt you. You have to understand that. I clenched my fists, the anger bubbling back up inside me. The words she spoke were so carefully constructed, so rehearsed, that they felt hollow. They didn't mean anything to me anymore. You've been hurting me for months, Jessica, I said, my voice strained. Every time you went out with him, every time you came back late, every time you pulled away from me, I could feel it, but I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to see it. She reached for me, her hand trembling, but I stepped back, instinctively. The touch I once welcomed now felt foreign, like it was from a stranger. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Please don't leave me like this. I don't know what I was thinking. It was a mistake. All of it. Don't make it sound like it was just a mistake. I snapped, my patience finally running out. This wasn't just some mistake you made, Jessica. This was deliberate. This was you choosing him over me, over us. You could have come to me. You could have been honest. But instead, you chose to lie, to betray me, to throw everything away for something that didn't even matter in the end. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw something that resembled guilt flicker across her expression. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo what had been done. She had already made her choices. The trust we had built over years, years of laughter, love, shared moments, was shattered in an instant. And no amount of tears or apologies could piece it back together. I don't know who you are anymore, I said, the words feeling like acid on my tongue. It was true, though. I didn't know her. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted with my heart, had been replaced by someone I couldn't recognize. She took a step toward me, her eyes wide with panic. Please don't say that. You're the only one I've ever truly loved, and I ruined everything. Stop. I cut her off, raising my hand. Stop trying to fix this with words, Jessica, because words don't mean anything anymore. The damage is done. The trust is gone, and I'm not sure I can ever get it back. She froze. The silence between us stretched longer, more unbearable with each passing second. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the regret, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. I turned and walked toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed space. I needed air. I needed to be away from her, away from everything that had been my life up until that point. Where are you going? She asked, her voice filled with confusion and fear. I don't know. I answered honestly, though the words felt like a lie. But I can't stay here. I opened the door, stepping out into the cool night air. The world outside felt different, somehow. The streets, the houses, everything that had once felt so familiar now seemed foreign, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. I just knew I couldn't be there anymore. Not in that house, not with her. As I walked through the dark streets, my mind kept replaying everything she had said. The way she had tried to justify her actions, the way she had looked at me like I was the one who was wrong for feeling betrayed. How had I not seen it sooner? How had I let myself be so blind? I found myself in front of a small bar a few blocks down, the neon sign flickering above the door. I didn't care about the time or the people inside. I just needed a drink. I needed something to dull the ache that had settled in my chest. I walked in, taking a seat at the bar. The bartender barely looked up as he poured me a drink. I didn't care. The alcohol burned as it slid down my throat, but it didn't take away the sting. Nothing would. Not now. The door opened behind me, and I glanced up to see a figure step inside. A familiar face, though I wasn't sure why it was familiar. The man walked in slowly, scanning the room before his eyes landed on me. I didn't know what to make of it. Why was he looking at me like that? I wasn't in the mood to deal with anyone. But then, the figure approached. "Mark," I said under my breath. Mark was an old friend of Jessica's. I didn't know much about him, except that he had always been a little too eager to get involved in our lives. But the fact that he had walked in here, into my private hell, felt like more than just a coincidence. He stood there for a moment, his gaze flickering between me and the drink in my hand. "You okay?" he asked, his voice quiet, as if he could tell something was wrong. "I will be," I muttered, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. Mark didn't say anything for a long moment. He just sat beside me, the weight of the silence growing between us. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low. "She's gone, isn't she?" I looked at him, the words barely forming in my head. "Yeah," I said, the weight of it sinking deeper into my soul. "She's gone." Mark didn't ask me any more questions after that. He just sat there with me in silence. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel the pressure to explain myself. The words that had been burning on the tip of my tongue all night, anger, frustration, betrayal, seemed to dissipate in the quiet of that moment. Maybe it was because Mark didn't press me, maybe it was because I wasn't ready to face what had happened yet, but whatever the reason, I couldn't bring myself to say another word. I didn't know how long we sat there. The dim lighting of the bar, the clinking of glasses in the background, the low hum of conversation, everything seemed distant, like it wasn't a part of my reality anymore. My life felt like it was on pause. I had this overwhelming sense of being adrift, caught between a past that I could never return to and a future that felt like an empty void. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "She's not the person you thought she was, is she?" he asked, his voice surprisingly soft, almost like he was trying to be careful, like he understood the gravity of what I was feeling. I looked at him, startled. "What do you mean by that?" Mark shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable, like he knew he was treading on dangerous ground. "I've known Jessica for a long time," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I can tell you that she's never been someone to just sit back and settle. She's always had more going on, more behind the scenes than most people realized." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. My mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. Had I been blind to who she really was all along? Was this all just some act, some version of her that I had created in my mind because I didn't want to face the truth? "You're telling me you knew something?" I asked, my voice sharp, suddenly more alert. "You knew she was with him?" Mark shook his head, a little too quickly. "No, I didn't know for sure, but I could tell. The way she would talk about you, or not talk about you. The way she'd avoid certain topics when they came up. I could tell she was drifting." It hit me like a slap in the face. This wasn't just about some one-time slip-up, some momentary lapse in judgment. This was years of her pulling away, of her building a life I wasn't a part of. And I had been so focused on trying to save our marriage, trying to hold it together, that I missed it all. Every little sign, every little shift in her behavior. And now, here I was, sitting in a bar, listening to a man tell me that my wife had been living a double life behind my back. I felt dizzy. The alcohol burned in my throat, but it didn't numb the ache inside. I wanted to lash out at Mark, to tell him that he had no right to talk about her like that, but a part of me knew that he was right. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had been living in a fantasy. I had been so caught up in the idea of us, of what we used to be, that I refused to see what was really happening. "I don't know what to do anymore," I whispered, my words barely audible over the noise of the bar. "I don't know who she is, and I don't know who I am anymore." Mark didn't say anything. He just sat there, letting me process, letting the silence sink in. I appreciated that. I didn't need advice or empty words of comfort. I needed time. Time to figure out what came next. Time to understand how my entire world had come crashing down. After a long while, Mark finished his drink and stood up, his hand briefly resting on my shoulder. "Look," he said, his voice steady but kind. "You're going to figure this out. But don't let it destroy you. You deserve better than this. You deserve to know the truth, no matter how much it hurts." I nodded, though I didn't feel any better. The truth hurt more than I ever imagined. And I knew, deep down, that I had to face it head on if I was ever going to heal. Mark left, and I was alone again, surrounded by the noise and the chaos of the world outside, yet I felt more isolated than ever. The truth had set in, but it hadn't set me free. It had torn away the last semblance of the life I had thought I was living. I stayed at the bar for a while longer, not drinking, just staring into my glass, lost in my own thoughts. There was so much I didn't know, so much I needed to understand. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Jessica's betrayal. This was about me, too. About the person I had become, the person I had let myself be. The next morning, when I walked back into that house, I knew that everything had changed. I wasn't the same person I had been when I left. And neither was she. She was sitting in the living room when I walked in, her face pale, eyes swollen from crying. For a moment, she looked like the woman I had married. But I knew better now. I couldn't unsee the things I had learned. I couldn't pretend like everything was fine. She stood up slowly, her eyes pleading with me. I didn't want this, you have to believe me. But I didn't know what to believe anymore. The lies, the secrets, it was all too much to process. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure if I wanted to know the truth anymore. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, my voice steady but cold. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And for the first time in years, I didn't care about the future. I only cared about finding a way to survive the moment I was living in now. The silence that followed my words was suffocating. Jessica stood in the middle of the living room, her eyes wide, her hands shaking, but she didn't move. For a moment, we just stood there, locked in a standoff that neither of us had anticipated. She didn't know what to say, and I didn't know how to say what was burning inside me. I didn't want to hurt you, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper, as if she was speaking to herself more than to me. But I've been so unhappy for so long. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to demand answers, to tear the walls down that she had built around herself. I wanted to shout, "You were happy, Jessica? You told me you loved me. You said this was forever." But I didn't. Instead, the words stuck in my throat, twisted by a mixture of hurt, anger, and betrayal. I didn't want to hear her excuses anymore. I didn't want to listen to the reasons she had made for walking away from everything we had built. The more she spoke, the more I realized how deep this had all gone, how much I had been blinded by the love I thought I still had for her. "Why him?" I asked, the question coming out more quietly than I intended. But I had to ask it. I had to know why it had to be him. Why it had to be someone so close, so present. Jessica didn't answer right away. Her gaze dropped to the floor, and for a second, I thought she wouldn't speak at all. But then she looked back up at me, her eyes red-rimmed, and said, "I don't know. It just happened. I didn't plan it." "You didn't plan it?" I repeated, incredulous. The words tasted bitter on my tongue. "How does that make any sense? You didn't plan to cheat on your husband? You didn't plan to tear our life apart? And now you're telling me it just happened? You don't even know how to lie about this anymore?" The anger came flooding back, and I could feel my hands balling into fists at my sides. The betrayal, the lies, it was all too much to handle, and I had no idea how to stop the torrent of emotions that were threatening to drown me. "I was lonely," she said, the words coming out slowly, as if she had been rehearsing them in her mind. "I was lonely, and I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. You were always distant. We were living in the same house, but we were living separate lives. I didn't know how to tell you that, and then he came along, and I guess it was easier to pretend, easier to feel wanted again." The weight of her words hit me like a hammer. Loneliness. That was her excuse? For months, I had been wondering why she pulled away, why we had drifted apart. I thought it was just stress, work, the usual. But now, hearing her say it, hearing her admit that she felt abandoned, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. And yet, the anger I had been holding on to, the frustration at everything she had done, overpowered the hurt. "So what now?" I asked, my voice low, dangerous even. "What do we do now, Jessica? Now that everything's out in the open? Are you expecting me to just forgive you? To just act like this never happened?" She took a step forward, but I stepped back, instinctively. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "I don't know what you want from me. I don't know what to do anymore. You don't know?" I interrupted. "You don't know what to do? You've had months to think about it, Jessica. You've been making decisions for months, and now you stand there telling me you don't know what to do?" I didn't know if I was angry at her anymore or angry at myself for putting up with her excuses for so long. The realization was hitting me now. This wasn't just about her affair. This was about everything that led up to it. The distance, the silence, the slow, creeping disconnection between us. I'm not going to pretend this is fixable. I continued, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay composed. I'm not going to pretend that I can just forgive you and move on like nothing happened. You've taken that from me. You've taken everything. I could see the guilt written across her face. She didn't fight back anymore. She didn't try to explain or justify her actions. It was as if, somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew it was too late. Too late for apologies, too late for regrets. What she had done couldn't be undone. The foundation we had built together had been shattered, and no amount of remorse was going to put it back together. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered, her voice barely audible now. I never wanted to hurt you. I loved you. I still do, but I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were. That was the final blow. The truth was clear. We couldn't go back. I couldn't go back. I don't know if I can be with you anymore, Jessica, I said, the words tasting like gravel in my mouth. It wasn't an easy thing to say, but it was the truth. You broke me. You broke us. She stood there, her face crumpling, her eyes welling up again. But I didn't feel pity for her. Not anymore. The woman I had married, the one I had trusted with my heart, was gone, and in her place was someone I couldn't even recognize. I have to go, I said quietly, stepping toward the door. I can't do this anymore. Where will you go? She asked, her voice shaking, but it didn't matter anymore. I didn't have an answer. I didn't need one. I just needed to leave. I didn't look back as I walked out the door, leaving the life I thought I knew behind. The car ride was a blur. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay at that house, in that place that once felt like home. It was like every mile I put between myself and her was another layer of the life we had built, another fragment of something that no longer existed. The streets looked different, the night air felt colder, and I felt like I was walking in someone else's shoes. The city passed by in a haze of streetlights and half-seen faces. I didn't want to go back to the apartment I had been renting before we moved in together. That place was just as much a reminder of who I used to be as the house we shared. I couldn't bring myself to face any of it. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind running in circles, trying to make sense of everything, but it wasn't working. Every time I tried to focus on the details of what had happened, my mind would snap back to her. Jessica, standing in the doorway with those empty eyes, telling me she loved me, still. I had loved her too, but I was starting to realize that love, real love, isn't enough to fix what's broken. It wasn't enough to repair the trust that had been shattered by her actions, by her lies. The more I thought about everything, the more it became clear there was no coming back from this. I pulled into a quiet parking lot, somewhere in the middle of the city, and parked the car. The quiet of the place matched the storm that was brewing inside me. I sat there, staring out the windshield, watching the shadows dance in the moonlight. I didn't know how long I sat there, but it felt like hours. And then I saw it. My phone buzzed, vibrating against the seat. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know what she had to say, or what kind of excuse she was going to come up with now. But I picked it up anyway. The screen lit up with her name. Please come back. We need to talk. It was a simple message, but the weight of it hit me hard. She was asking me to come back. She was asking me to fix it, to somehow mend everything she had torn apart. I felt the anger flare up again, hotter this time, more focused. How many times had I let her walk all over me? How many times had I ignored the signs, the little things that didn't add up, all because I didn't want to lose her? And now she was asking me to come back, to pick up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, my knuckles white. This wasn't right. None of this was right. She had chosen him over me. She had chosen a lie over everything we had built together. And now she wanted me to come back and pretend like nothing had happened? I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and got out of the car. I needed to clear my head. I needed space. I walked through the empty streets, not caring where I was going, just needing the time to think. The city was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens in the dead of night when everything is still and the world feels like it's holding its breath. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find, but all I knew was that I couldn't go back. Not yet. Not without knowing what I needed to do. A few blocks away, I came to a small park, the swings creaking gently in the breeze. I sat down on one, the cool metal biting into the back of my legs. I closed my eyes and let the stillness of the world wash over me, trying to push away the thoughts of Jessica, of everything that had happened. But it wasn't enough. It never was. I heard footsteps behind me, and when I turned around, I saw Mark. The last person I expected to see, especially out here at this hour. He must have seen the look on my face, the one that said everything without me having to say a word. I figured I might find you here, he said, his voice calm. But there was a hint of concern in his eyes. You're a hard man to track down. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't have the energy to. Are you okay? Mark asked, sitting down beside me. He didn't push me for answers. He didn't try to make me talk. He just sat there, letting me process the mess I was in. No, I finally said, the word coming out of me before I could stop it. No, I'm not okay. Mark nodded, as if he already knew that. I didn't mean to get involved, but when I saw the way she was acting, I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't know it would be this bad. I looked at him, confused. What are you talking about? What did you see? Mark took a deep breath. She wasn't herself for a long time, man. She's been pulling away from everyone. Her friends, her family, you. She thought she could just hide it, but it was obvious. I think she was trying to convince herself that she could have both worlds, that she could keep you and be with him at the same time. But in the end, she didn't care enough to even try to make it work with you. I felt my heart sink again. The words Mark said were sharp, but they weren't untrue. For the first time, I realized that Jessica wasn't the only one who had been lying. I had been lying to myself, too. I had convinced myself that everything would be okay, that I could fix it, that we could somehow get back to where we were. But the truth was, it was broken, beyond repair. I should have seen it coming, I said, more to myself than to Mark. I should have noticed sooner. But I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that everything would be okay if I just held on a little longer. Mark put a hand on my shoulder. Don't blame yourself, man. She made her choices. You didn't make them for her. I sat in silence for a long time after that, letting the weight of his words sink in. Maybe he was right. Maybe this wasn't my fault. Maybe, for once, I didn't have to carry the burden of everything. But even knowing that didn't make the pain go away. I don't know what to do now, I finally said, my voice rough. Mark didn't have an answer. There was no magic fix for what I was going through. There was no way to rewind time, no way to undo the damage that had already been done. I know you think it's over, Mark said after a long pause. But maybe it's not. Maybe this is the beginning of something new. I didn't know if I believed him, but I couldn't ignore the truth in his words. Maybe this was the beginning. The beginning of something I had never expected to face. The beginning of me, alone. The night passed slowly, and I spent the next few hours wrestling with my thoughts. The city around me remained the same, busy, indifferent to the storm raging inside me. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like the weight had been lifted, not because the answers were easy or clear, but because I was finally starting to accept the reality of what had happened. It hurt. It felt like I was walking away from everything I had known, but in some strange way, I also knew it was the only way forward. Mark had left me with some words of wisdom, but I didn't want to hear them at first. I didn't want to hear that everything would be fine, that life would somehow work itself out. But as I sat there alone, watching the world wake up around me, I started to understand. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't happen overnight. But the road to healing started with acceptance. And that acceptance had to come from me, not from anyone else. When I walked back to the car, I felt strangely lighter, like I was shedding the last pieces of the life I had been desperately holding on to. Jessica had broken something inside me, but for the first time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was sad. I was disappointed. But I wasn't angry. And that, in itself, was progress. I drove home that morning, but I didn't know what I was going to say to her. I didn't know if there was anything left to say. The house was still the same, the empty spaces where we used to sit together, eat dinner, laugh about silly things. But the silence that greeted me when I walked through the door was deafening. She was sitting in the living room, her face pale and tired. She didn't look surprised to see me, but she also didn't look relieved. There was no joyful reunion, no apology that could undo the damage. Instead, there was a calmness between us, a silent understanding of what had passed. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I know I hurt you, and I'll never be able to take that back." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in days. She wasn't the woman I had married. She wasn't even the person I thought I knew. But she was still someone I cared about, someone who had been a part of my life for so long. And as much as I wanted to turn around and walk away, I knew I couldn't. I wasn't ready to completely sever the ties. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, the words feeling both heavy and freeing at the same time. But I can't keep living like this. I need to focus on myself now. I need to rebuild, not just my trust in you, but my trust in me. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I understand. I know I don't deserve anything from you right now, but I'll do anything to make things right, even if it's just by giving you the space you need. It was strange, standing there, knowing that everything we had built was crumbling. But in that moment, I wasn't overwhelmed by the sense of loss. Instead, there was a quiet sense of peace. Peace that came from knowing that, for once, I wasn't going to fight for something that wasn't meant to be. I left the house that morning, but not in anger, not in frustration. I left with a sense of finality, but not defeat. I walked away from the woman I thought I would spend my life with, but I walked toward something else. Toward healing. Toward rediscovering who I was when I wasn't someone's husband, someone's partner, someone's better half. It wasn't the end of the world. It was the beginning of something new. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. Not because I had all the answers, but because I knew I could handle whatever came next. And so I drove away. No more looking back. No more holding on to the past. The future was waiting, and this time, I was ready to face it on my own terms. As the sun broke through the clouds, I knew that this was just the beginning of my journey. A journey toward healing, toward growth, toward reclaiming my life and my happiness. It would take time. It would take effort. But I was ready. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was mine. And that, in itself, was something worth fighting for.